Hey guys! Tonight we slip into a place that doesn't exactly scream cozy bedtime. Imagine a drafty medieval home, the walls nothing more than rough stone with gaps that invite every gust of wind. The floor made of packed earth that feels colder than any ice cube tray, and the air heavy with a dampness you just can't shake. You're bundled up, trying to convince yourself this is fine. But honestly, you probably won't survive this joke. If a sneeze doesn't get you, the smoke stinging your eyes will. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and the local time right now. I'm curious to see where in the world you're listening from. Wow. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the heavy wooden door of your medieval dwelling, and instantly the cold bites at your skin. The walls are thick stone, but they're not insulated, and that means they act like giant blocks of ice, radiating chill back into the room. The only thing standing between you and the outside weather is a layer of wood or animal skin tacked across cracks, but those don't do much. Every draft finds a way in. At night, when the frost settles outside, you feel it inside too. There's no central heating, no warm vents humming in the background. The home feels more like a storage cave than a refuge. And yet, this was normal life. Families expected to fight the cold every evening. It wasn't unusual for breath to turn to mist indoors, your own living room doubling as a freezer. What you'd notice most is how much the cold shaped everything about the layout. Medieval houses were usually one main room, maybe with a loft above for sleeping, but no matter the arrangement, warmth was the center of design. That center was the hearth. But here's the problem. With no chimney, smoke just swirled up to the rafters and lingered. It would sting you. You'd feel that danger as you try to lie down at night. The bed? Nothing plush, just a simple wooden frame, or even just straw scattered on the floor. If you were lucky, you had a thin mattress stuffed with straw or hay, which was scratchy, itchy, and probably crawling with more than you'd like to admit. The cold seeped straight through, so you piled up whatever you had, animal hides, wool blankets, maybe an old cloak. But no matter how much you layered, there was no escaping the chill of those stone walls pressing in around you. One quirky tidbit that doesn't often make the spotlight. In some places, people tried to hang tapestries or even just rough cloth against their walls to trap warmth. It didn't really work, but it made rooms look a little less like dungeons. Some wealthier households embroidered elaborate wall hangings, which were partly decoration, but mostly insulation. A noble's hall without tapestries wasn't just bare, it was freezing. Meanwhile, poor families in rural cottages relied more on livestock for warmth than decoration. Yes, you heard right. Your animals doubled as your heating system. Chickens, goats, even a cow might be kept indoors overnight, their body heat raising the temperature just enough to keep frostbite at bay. Romantic? Not exactly. Practical? Absolutely. And still, the nights dragged on, long and dark, with a fire burning low and every creak of the wood reminding you that tomorrow you'll have to gather more fuel, repair the rushes on the floor, and keep fending off that endless winter air. It's funny to think how something as ordinary as warmth was the real treasure in medieval life. No wonder people developed such strong rituals around their hearths. that little pocket of heat wasn't just about surviving. It was the heart of home, family, and the rhythm of everyday life. The hearth is always the first thing your eyes land on, not because it's grand or beautiful, but because it's alive. Everything else in the room feels cold and still, yet that one smoldering pile of logs, peat, or sometimes even dried dung is the pulse of the household. You shuffle closer, drawn by its glow, though the heat never seems to travel as far as you wish it would. The flames snap, but the smoke refuses to behave. It rises, curls, and then drifts sideways into your face. You cough, eyes watering, and you wonder how entire generations lived with lungs full of this. See, chimneys weren't common in medieval homes at first. Instead, the fire sat on a simple stone or clay base, its smoke expected to find its own way out through a hole in the roof, or maybe a gap left in the gables. But the smoke had other plans. It lingered, soaked into beams, and stained walls black. People joked you could read the age of a house by how dark the rafters were, and that wasn't far from the truth. A new roof beam shone pale, while an old one was jet black, polished by decades of smoke. Historians still argue whether households tolerated the constant haze, or whether they were simply too busy surviving to complain. And yet, despite the coughs, the hearth wasn't just tolerated, it was revered. It gave you light in a world where candles were precious, and it gave you flavor in your food, since every stew or roast had its hint of smoke embedded deep. The family gathered here because no other corner offered relief. You'd see grandmother rocking in a rough wooden chair, children lying belly down near the coals, adults leaning on knees, half asleep. Huddled together, you look like you're orbiting a tiny sun. One quirky tidbit: some homes had what's called a smoke hood, a primitive sort of funnel meant to guide fumes upward, though it rarely worked well. Sometimes it even caught fire itself, which I suppose turned one problem into two. Night or day, the hearth never truly died. Someone always tended it, feeding scraps of wood or peat. Letting it go out meant more. Straw is scratchy, but it's cheap, and in a medieval home that made it precious. You drop down onto a bed made of nothing more than a wooden frame stuffed with hay or rushes, and you instantly feel every stalk poking through. It crinkles under your weight, prickly against your skin, and you wonder how anyone ever managed to sleep like this without waking up half covered in red lines. Still, it's better than lying directly on the packed earth floor, where the cold seeps up like water through cloth. To soften the sting, families piled furs on top, goat, sheep, or whatever they could afford. Some were coarse, some were soft. Most carried the faint odor of the animal that once owned them. Layer by layer, you tucked yourself in until the bulk of coverings weighed almost as much as your body. Rolling over wasn't graceful. It was a team effort. The furs kept you warm, though, so you tolerated the heaviness. Woolen cloaks were another layer of defense. By day, they hung around your shoulders. By night, they doubled as blankets. You'd wrap yourself so tightly that your breath warmed your own little cocoon, and sometimes that was the only heat you felt all evening. Medieval people learned quickly that clothes weren't just fashion. They were heating systems. One historical fact that might surprise you: many floors in poorer cottages were strewn with fresh rushes or straw, not just for comfort, but for insulation. Replaced every few weeks, the old layers built up, mixing with dirt, food scraps, and worse. It may have held in some warmth, but it also held in plenty of other things. You'd rather not think about what lived in those piles. The quirky detail? Bed sharing wasn't only about intimacy. It was about survival. Families, siblings, even servants would sleep shoulder to shoulder, not just to gossip before drifting off, but to pool body heat. You might find yourself pressed against someone snoring loudly, someone with icy feet, or someone who tossed and turned all night. Complaining wasn't an option. The warmth of others outweighed the discomfort. And yet, warmth was fragile. In winter, a spilled drink, a sudden leak in the roof. You wake in the half-light of dawn, still swaddled in scratchy layers, and realize that in the medieval world, warmth didn't come from architecture. It came from what you wore. Clothes weren't just a statement of status. They were a shield against winter's bite. You pull on a linen undertunic, thin but breathable, though it feels damp from yesterday's sweat. Over that goes wool, heavy and rough, dyed in muted hues of russet, indigo, or dull green. Then a cloak, thick and scratchy, pinned with a brooch at the shoulder. By the time you're done layering, you look less like a person and more like a walking bundle of fabric. Medieval people learned to treat clothing as insulation, stacking layer upon layer to trap body heat. Wool was the champion, naturally water-resistant, though never fully warm if it was wet. Linen kept your skin from itching too badly, though it had its limits. Fur trims helped, but only the wealthy could afford entire garments lined with fur. A peasant's fur might come from rabbit or sheep, while a noble draped themselves in sable or ermine, each pelt a bragging right as much as a comfort. A quirky little truth. Sometimes people literally slept in their clothes, day garments and all, because undressing meant shivering. Boots by the bed, cloak still clasped. You could roll from sleep straight into work. Romantic? Not really. Practical? Absolutely. The cold was so relentless that even indoors you never really stripped down. Children bundled in whatever scraps of wool existed, while adults patched and repatched garments until they were more stitch than fabric. Tailors weren't just for fancy cities. In villages, everyone knew how to darn, sew, and salvage. You never wasted a scrap of cloth when your survival depended on it. Historians still argue about how colorful the average medieval person's wardrobe was. Some believe peasants dressed in endless browns and grays, while others point to evidence of vibrant dyes like saffron yellow and madder red, showing up even in rural households. Maybe the truth sits somewhere in the middle. Muted colors for every day, brighter ones saved for feast days. But whether dull or now imagine stepping into a noble's hall, where warmth is both a comfort and a statement. The fireplace here is grand, its stones around carved with simple patterns, but the fire itself is larger than anything a peasant could manage. Flames lick the hearth with golden light, reflecting off tall, heavy tapestries in deep teal, russet, and saffron, designed as much to impress as to insulate. You might think this would feel cozy, but even here the air is tinged with smoke, curling up toward a barely effective chimney. Tapestries serve multiple purposes. They're decorative, they tell stories in elaborate embroidery, and they trap some of the chill that tries to creep through the thick stone walls. Each thread is painstakingly gilded with tiny touches of shell gold, catching the firelight in a way that makes the hall shimmer. Yet the noble hall is enormous, high-ceilinged, and drafts sneak in around doors and windows, reminding you that wealth cannot completely banish winter. At the hearth, the family gathers differently than in a peasant cottage. You see multiple generations, from aging grandparents to young children, all reclining near the warmth. Everyone wears multiple layers of clothing, cloaks lined with fur, woolen tunics, and stockings in muted colors of indigo, russet, and forest green. Servants tend the fire, feeding logs and adjusting iron fire tongs, while the scent of roasting meat fills the room. A luxury compared to the sparse diets of rural households. A quirky fringe detail. Nobles sometimes used heated stones wrapped in cloth and placed them in their beds or even under seats to maintain comfort. It sounds luxurious now, but to them it was simply another way to survive the cold nights that even stone walls couldn't fully resist. Historians still debate how much warmth these grand halls actually provided. Written accounts suggest that despite fireplaces and tapestries, inhabitants often wore layers indoors and spent long evenings near the hearth just to stay comfortable. Luxury didn't equate to absolute heat. It merely made surviving the chill a little less arduous. Night descends, and you notice how medieval sleeping arrangements are as much about strategy as rest. Beds aren't just places to lie down, they're survival tools. In smaller homes, a single room often houses the entire family, and that means sleeping in layers, shoulder to shoulder, to share body heat. You tuck yourself into a straw-stuffed mattress, adding animal hides and wool blankets. Exhale sharply, feeling every uneven lump and rough edge beneath you. The floor may be covered with rushes, but they barely insulate against the stone-cold draft that creeps in through gaps in walls and around shutters. Bed curtains, if you're lucky enough to have them, provide a small barrier against the chill and any stray sparks from the hearth. They're heavy, coarse, and often patched with whatever scraps of fabric were available. Drawing them close gives you a sense of enclosed warmth, though the air inside is thick and a little stale. Even so, you breathe easier, knowing the barrier exists between you and the rest of the room, or the livestock, sometimes kept nearby for extra heat. One quirky detail. People sometimes slept in a diagonal huddle, with heads tucked against warm shoulders and feet pointing toward the hearth. It sounds uncomfortable now, but in medieval winters, it was a tactical decision. Maximize the shared body warmth while leaving room for the youngest or weakest family members. A grandmother might curl around several children, acting as a human radiator, while adults took positions closest to the walls to protect the more fragile sleepers. Even in castles, the principle is the same, though with grander beds. Richer families might have multiple mattresses stacked, curtains thick with embroidery and fur lining, and heated stones placed inside to warm the sheets. Still, no matter the wealth, the cold has a way of sneaking in. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders and tuck under the blankets, realizing that warmth is a constant negotiation, not a given. Historians still argue about how comfortable medieval nights truly were. Some suggest wood was life, but wood was never guaranteed. You quickly learn that the fight against winter begins with firewood, and in medieval homes, scarcity is a constant companion. Trees don't grow in convenient piles, and gathering enough logs means long days spent in the forest, chopping, hauling, and stacking while your fingers numb from cold. Peasants relied on communal rites to collect fallen branches or coppice trees, but those rules were strict. Overstepping them could lead to fines, or worse, accusations of theft. Every splintered log, every twig saved, counted as precious warmth. When firewood ran low, creativity became survival. Peat, dried dung, and other biomass were burned, often producing more smoke than heat. The scent was pungent, the smoke thick, and yet it was all that kept frostbite at bay. You crouch near the hearth, inhaling the acrid fumes, grateful for any warmth it provides. A fire tended poorly might go out overnight, leaving you shivering and forcing you to relight it at first light. That labor was constant. Warmth was never permanent, never secure. Small props and tools come into play here. Iron fire tongs, a wooden shovel, wicker baskets for carrying kindling, all are crucial to survival. You watch someone tend the fire, shifting logs, adjusting embers, fanning sparks into life. The smoke curls around their hands, gilded in the firelight, a subtle warning of both danger and necessity. A quirky historical note. Some households kept small caches of embers in clay pots, carried between homes during cold snaps. This was a primitive way to share warmth within a village, a nod to community survival that still resonates in stories of medieval generosity. Historians debate how widespread this practice was, but accounts suggest it was common enough to matter in daily life. Even in wealthier homes, wood shortages weren't unheard of. Nobles might have reserves of cut logs, but winter was long and heavy, and one particularly harsh season could make even the largest fireplace inadequate. Ingenious hacks often make the difference between shivering and surviving. You watch as a woman fills a small iron pan with hot coals, wrapping it in cloth before placing it under a thin mattress. It radiates heat slowly, warming the bed from beneath, an intimate, almost secret ritual that only the occupants truly understand. Hot stones, warming pans, and even embers carried from the hearth are distributed with careful precision. Each item is a small triumph over the relentless winter chill. Communal ovens play a dual role. In villages, families take turns baking bread or roasting meats in a shared brick oven, and while the primary function is food, the residual heat radiates into the surrounding rooms. You huddle nearby, letting the warm air curl around your arms and face, appreciating the clever exploitation of resources. A quirky tidbit. Some households would hang wet blankets briefly over doorways and windows to trap heat, a rudimentary but effective insulation trick. Others stuffed cracks in walls with moss or old rags. Every inch of warmth counts, and you learn to read a room by where the heat pools and where the cold gathers. Iron implements, fire tongues, pokers, and small cauldrons are more than tools. They're instruments of survival. Adjusting embers, shifting coals, or moving a kettle can mean the difference between a night of relative comfort and one spent huddled in misery. Historians still debate how widespread these techniques were, but archaeological evidence of hearth designs, embedded stones, and clay pans suggests that inventive warmth hacks were common across Europe. At night, the family gathers, employing these tricks instinctively. Children might lie on a thickened rush mat warmed by hot stones. Adults lean close to the hearth, and the smallest ember becomes a shared treasure. Even minor innovations, a folded blanket here, a small fire pan there, are amplified into survival strategies. By sunrise, you've seen a household transform tiny resources into a shield against cold, a testament to human ingenuity in the most basic, tactile ways. The kitchen is a battlefield against cold, where heat and food collide in a smoky haze. You step inside, and the chill hits differently here. Stone floors, open windows for ventilation, and a hearth large enough to roast meats or boil pottages, yet still drafty. The aroma of burning wood mingles with the smell of stews, tangy smoke, and the faint musk of straw mats underfoot. Cooking is survival. Each meal requires coaxing flames, stirring pots, and adjusting iron hooks so nothing scorches. Every item has a purpose. Wooden buckets hold water, wicker baskets store vegetables, and iron cauldrons hang over the fire like suspended shields of warmth. Sparks leap occasionally, and someone quickly shifts the coals with fire tongs, careful not to lose a single ember that could heat the room or prevent frost from creeping indoors. Quirky historical tidbit. Medieval cooks sometimes lined hearths with stones to retain heat longer, turning ovens into rudimentary radiators. Bread baked early in the day could provide residual warmth well into the evening, and the family gathered near these heat pockets, relishing both nourishment and comfort. Smoke, however, is persistent. Even with ventilation holes, wisps of gray coil around faces, cling to clothing, and make eyes water. Yet people accept it as a given. Some scholars argue that medieval kitchens were more tolerable in winter than other rooms, because constant activity produced heat. But others contend that the combination of smoke, cold air, and damp floors made it equally harsh. The rhythmic sounds of stirring, chopping, and the occasional crackle of fire form the nocturnal soundtrack. You notice a child huddled on the floor near a stone warmed by coals, an elder monitoring a bubbling pot, and someone stoking the fire with a piece of damp wood. In these spaces, warmth and survival intermingle, and ingenuity, along with attentiveness, is the difference between comfort and frostbite. Winter nights brought more than cold. They brought superstition. You notice little charms tucked above doorways, a sprig of herbs hanging near the hearth, and a small iron trinket nailed to a wall, all meant to ward off wandering spirits that were believed to slip in with the biting wind. The family moves carefully, whispering prayers or muttering old incantations to keep both frost and misfortune at bay. Even the children know which corners to avoid and which symbols are safe to touch. Faith and folklore shape the rhythm of the household. Candle flames flicker, casting long shadows across rough stone walls, and every draught feels alive. A dropped pot might be blamed on mischievous spirits. A sudden chill on the stairs could be a warning from the ancestors. Historians still debate how literal these beliefs were. Some argue that people genuinely feared spirits, others that they were convenient explanations for otherwise unexplainable cold, illness, or accidents. Either way, superstition colors every shadow. Quirky tidbit. In some villages, families would bake bread in shapes meant to protect their home from winter ailments, hanging the loaves near the fire until fully baked. The scent of warm bread became a talisman, a comforting combination of nourishment and charm. You notice layers of warmth mixed with ritual. A cloak is wrapped tighter. A child clutches a talisman while falling asleep, and elders murmur prayers over the hearth. Every action has a dual purpose: survival and protection, body and soul, The cold is real, but the unseen threats add another layer of tension. The glow of the fire illuminates gilded threads in wall hangings, the muted tones of woolen clothing, and the glint of iron charms. Shadows dance across faces, and you sense how every medieval household wove together practicality and belief, creating a tapestry of life that shields both from cold and from the imagined dangers of winter. Daily routines shift dramatically when winter takes hold. You rise before dawn, bundled in layers of wool and linen, and step onto the cold, packed earth floor, feeling the frost bite your toes through even the thickest stockings. Outside, the farm lies dormant. Frost stiffens the soil, and livestock huddle for warmth. Work is confined indoors, mending garments, weaving baskets, tending to small chores that won't expose you to the frozen landscape. The rhythm of life slows, dictated by the cold, and each task becomes a measured effort to conserve warmth and energy. Inside, the hearth dictates the schedule. Someone tends the fire constantly, adjusting coals and adding small pieces of wood with precision, while others prepare simple meals or maintain bedding and rushes. Children play quietly near the warmth, perhaps tossing a wooden toy or mimicking adult tasks, while elders supervise and instruct. Even leisure is tempered by practicality. Games and storytelling happen close to the flames, where you won't lose fingers to frost. Quirky tidbit: some households devised indoor gardens of sprouting grains or herbs to provide fresh greens during long winters. Placed near the fire, these small green shoots benefited from residual warmth and light, a subtle fusion of survival and ingenuity. Scholarly debate continues about how rural medieval communities structured their winter days. Some evidence suggests that activities were almost entirely indoor-focused, while others indicate that short bursts of outdoor labor were unavoidable for essential chores. Either way, the cold reshaped everything, forcing a slower, more deliberate pace. Evenings are a reflection of the day, hands warmed near the hearth, faces glowing from exertion, and a household attuned to the rhythm of frost and fire. The cold is relentless, but human adaptation, layered clothing, strategic chores, and communal warmth makes survival possible, and even gives a quiet sense of mastery over a harsh, frozen season. City life in medieval winter presents a different kind of chill. Narrow streets are packed with smoke, snow, and the odor of livestock, with houses leaning close together, leaving only a thin sliver of sky overhead. You step into a small urban dwelling, where stone walls are rough, windows tiny, and warmth a scarce commodity. Smoke from dozens of hearths mingles, filling the streets and interiors alike, creating a haze that clings to your clothes and hair. The cold is compounded by the cramped quarters, cobblestone floors, and constant drafts seeping through ill-fitted doors. Inside, households employ every trick to stay warm: hung tapestries, layered blankets, and hot stones tucked under beds. The density of city homes makes shared warmth inevitable. Families huddle together, sometimes with neighbors close by, as you hear distant chatter and the rhythmic sounds of nearby streets carrying into the room. Wicker baskets, wooden stools, and iron fire tongs are scattered strategically to facilitate both cooking and heating. Quirky tidbit: some urban dwellers burned discarded scraps of wood or coal remnants from local bakeries to supplement their fires, an improvised measure that added heat but also acrid smoke. Scholarly debate persists about urban versus rural winter survival. Cities offered access to community resources, but suffered from congestion, lack of fresh air, and constant cold. You notice the contrast sharply. Rural cottages rely on livestock warmth and open hearths, while city families invent clever strategies to make confined, smoky spaces bearable. Even the wealthiest urban households struggle against the persistent chill, layering clothing indoors and keeping flames carefully tended. The scene carries both tension and intimacy. Each household is a microcosm of warmth, survival, and ritual, nestled in streets that are cold, noisy, and alive. Smoke and shadows mingle with candlelight, creating patterns across walls and faces, a visual reminder that medieval urban life is an endless negotiation with winter. In the quiet of monasteries and scholarly chambers, cold takes on a different character. You step into a stone-walled scriptorium, where monks bend over parchment, quills scratching ink in meticulous strokes, their breath forming tiny clouds in the frigid air. Candles flicker, casting long shadows across shelves of scrolls and thickly bound manuscripts. Ink sometimes freezes in the quills, slowing work, and you notice the monks rubbing their hands together, stamping their feet, or leaning closer to the hearth in a desperate attempt to stay warm. The chill here is both literal and symbolic. Scholars pursue knowledge in rooms that are often unheated, their focus unbroken despite icy fingers. The hearth, if present, is modest, more for comfort than necessity, while outside, winter dominates courtyards and cloisters. You observe the meticulous layering of woolen robes, hoods pulled low, and furs draped over shoulders to maintain warmth without compromising movement for delicate writing. Quirky historical note. Some monasteries used small heated stones wrapped in cloth placed under the desk to keep fingers nimble, a secret aid to precision work. Scholars debated the ideal balance of light, warmth, and ventilation. Too much heat could warp parchment or quill ink. Too little left hands stiff and sluggish. Historians still argue about the degree of hardship these rooms imposed, though surviving manuscripts suggest that creativity and perseverance overcame discomfort. Despite the cold, a sense of ritual permeates the space. Each turn of the page, each carefully inked letter, is intertwined with the effort to remain warm. You notice the monks whispering prayers or humming softly, their voices mingling with the crackle of small fires and the occasional sigh of frost-laden wind entering through narrow windows. The scriptorium is both austere and intimate. Every movement, every flick of a quill, reflects a rhythm dictated by necessity, preserving warmth, maintaining focus, and producing work in a space where the cold is ever present, but never completely dominant. Here, survival and scholarship coexist, a delicate dance in the frozen heart of medieval learning. Medieval winters were no gentler for armies on the move. You picture soldiers trudging through snow, their boots sinking into frozen mud, cloaks and tunics heavy with frost, and the sharp wind slicing across exposed faces. Campfires, wherever they can be lit, provide momentary warmth, but it's fleeting. Embers die quickly, and the men huddle close, sharing heat whenever possible. Iron weapons, wooden shields, and tents stiffened with ice are constant reminders that survival is never guaranteed. The camp is chaotic. Smoke rises from scattered fires. Animals tied nearby paw at frozen ground. and the clatter of armor punctuates the quiet despair of soldiers facing relentless cold. Some carry heated stones or wrapped embers in small pouches, a borrowed trick from village households, but it barely compensates for the biting wind and damp clothing. Quirky historical detail: frostbite and hypothermia were common enough that commanders often had to ration warmth, prioritizing officers or those essential to immediate battle plans, a grim calculus of survival. Scholars still argue about how much preparation armies undertook for winter campaigns. Some records suggest meticulous planning with provisions and heated tents. Others paint a picture of improvisation and suffering. Either way, the cold reshaped strategy, slowed movement, and inflicted suffering as surely as enemy blades. Nightfall in the camp is eerie. Soldiers cluster around dying fires, sharing body warmth, while frost glints on their armor. Horses and pack animals huddle together, breath visible in the cold, creating a low chorus of steam and shivering life. Every ember, every shared blanket, is a lifeline. In this landscape, survival is tactical, communal, and fragile. The harsh winter dominates all, reminding you that medieval winters were battles unto themselves. Each step, each breath, a negotiation with frost, wind, and the relentless pull of icy nights. As the long winter nights draw to a close, you reflect on the fragility of warmth in medieval life. Every ember tended, every layered cloak, every body pressed close for shared heat was a small victory against relentless cold. You imagine families reclining near the hearth, livestock providing what little extra warmth they could, tapestries trapping fleeting heat, and hot stones tucked under mattresses, all temporary shields against a season that seemed eternal. Survival is never absolute. It is crafted in moments of attention, ritual, and ingenuity. You notice how small pleasures, the glow of a well-tended fire, the faint scent of roasting bread, the warmth of a neighbor's visit, become treasures. The rhythm of life is dictated by frost and flame, a delicate balance between discomfort and comfort. Children huddle under furs, elders stir coals, and the household hums quietly with the unspoken acknowledgement that warmth is both a practical and emotional necessity. Quirky tidbit: some medieval families maintained hearth rituals, small routines repeated daily, tending the fire at the same hour, positioning stones identically, stacking wood in familiar patterns, creating continuity and comfort amid the cold. Historians still debate the significance of these practices, but they reflect a profound understanding that survival is intertwined with habit, memory, and attention. Night deepens, and you feel the pervasive calm of a home cocooned against frost. Candles flicker, casting soft shadows on walls lined with tapestries, blankets, and animal hides. The cold presses in at edges, yet inside, warmth circulates like a whisper, fragile, yet precious. You notice the small gestures, hands clasped together, shared blankets, whispered instructions to maintain heat. Ultimately, warmth in the medieval world was fleeting, fragile, and fiercely cherished. It was never guaranteed, always negotiated, and earned through effort and vigilance. You drift through this scene, aware that comfort was as much a product of attention, ingenuity, and cooperation